It's been a bruising trade war for US and China. And in recent months, there are concerns that the trade and technology war might expand into a volatile new front: finance. A financial war will weaponize capital. In 2020, the US government moved to prevent a federal retirement fund from investing billions of dollars in shares of Chinese companies. A bill to force Chinese companies to delist from US stock exchanges if they do not open their books to US regulators was also passed unanimously by the Senate in May the same year. What could a financial war look like? One scenario, a dispute over SWIFT. The world pays for practically everything, mainly using the SWIFT international payment network. Every day, $5 trillion gets transferred across the world using this system.
There are two pillars of US dominance in the global financial system that allow it to sanction countries and track fund flows. The first is SWIFT, which is a messaging service that nearly all banks use to communicate payments information. SWIFT is based in Brussels, but American policymakers have enormous influence over it. For example, after 9/11, the US Treasury set up what's known as a terrorist finance tracking program, which used information about payments subpoenaed from SWIFT to investigate Al-Qaeda and other terror networks. The other pillar of US dominance is a vast network of US banks that serve as intermediaries. The control of this infrastructure gives the US immense power to trace financial flows around the globe, as well as to cut entities off from using this infrastructure through sanctions.
Questions that used to be unthinkable are now being considered. Could the US sanction China through this SWIFT dollar payment system? Or could it order the big banks, which clear dollar payments in America, to stop serving Chinese banks? There is a massive experiment underway in China, which hints at how seriously the country is responding to the threat of financial war. President Xi has designated blockchain to be one of the country's top innovation priorities. And China pushed ahead with trials of its new digital currency, taking early tentative steps that could one day free the world from relying on the dollar for international transactions. To understand how a digital yuan works, first, look to the cashless payment ecosystem in China. Even a trip to a place of worship is cashless. E-wallets and systems like WeChat Pay and Alipay are now dominant instead of cash. And widespread adoption of cashless payments have paved the way for China's central bank to begin experimenting with the digital yuan. In 2020, China became the first major economy to conduct a real-world test of a national digital currency.
Electronic payment, we call it EP, is actually a very important pre-step for the digital currency. Since we have Alipay and Tencent WeChat payment, and all of this payment method enable people to get used to a new way of making payment. So I think EP actually paved the way for the DC, the digital currency.
China's digital currency is now being trialed in 4 Chinese cities domestically. But the ultimate aim is to accelerate the internationalization of the yuan. China's former central bank governor said China's digital currency aims to push back against US dollar hegemony. China is the top trading partner of many countries, but its years-long ambition of internationalizing the yuan has progressed slowly. The yuan accounted for about 2% of global reserves and 1.76% of cross-border payments by June 2020. An ambitious plan for a digital yuan could set the motion for change, starting with China's borders with ASEAN.
We have 10 countries in ASEAN countries. Many countries are linking border with China. Do you have any idea how many people are traveling back and forth from China in the border regions like China and the Vietnam border, China and Myanmar border. So there are tens of millions of people just doing business between the borders. So in the past, if you are a Myanmar farmer, you have your fresh bamboo, you want to sell it to Chinese trading partner, and then you have your Myanmar dollar, and then you have to convert it to Chinese yuan. Now with digital currency, our friends in Myanmar and Vietnam and Laos, they don't need to open up a bank account in China, which is very hard. Now they can download an app, and then they can put their money into the authorized exchange post, and then the exchange post will issue the Chinese DC into their wallet. And they can use it for trade immediately. So they will enable the people's connection. They will boost the border trade. And with this change in the border, and then the influence will, go bigger and bigger.
In the US, the digital yuan experiment is raising concern. Systems like SWIFT has given the US leverage over other states, as sanctions that cut a country off from this network are usually a death sentence. Iran is a case in point. Washington has been increasingly relying on sanctions as a foreign policy tool. But the sharpness of that tool is now in question as China's digital currency takes root globally.
The scenario might be that Iran or another US adversary imports the digital currency infrastructure developed by China to set up its own digital currency and to conduct cross-border transactions with willing nations without the ability of US authorities to monitor or sanction these transactions. So in the case of Iran, if you remember, the US and its European allies used financial sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran deal, which was signed in 2015. At the time of the deal, Iran could not do business with US and with Europe. It had been cut off from SWIFT, meaning that it could not pay for imports or receive payments for exports, and its economy had been essentially crippled. So the US and its negotiating partners were able to leverage this and agree to lift some of these sanctions in return for limits to Iran's nuclear program. The threat that digital currencies pose is that they could be used to conduct cross-border transactions that A, don't need to use the SWIFT messaging service to communicate between banks, and B, they eliminate the need for correspondent banks because any user can make a payment directly to any other user anywhere in the world. So if China were to develop these cross-border technologies, then it would be capable of avoiding US oversight and US sanctions would be weakened. And in that scenario, then Iran could be conducting activities like enriching uranium, like building up its nuclear program, which would be out of US oversight.
It is precisely because of US financial sanctions that Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, has been embroiled in a lawsuit in Canada and unable to return to China. Such cases may become a thing of the past if China's digital currency takes root.